So, we've got our primary motor cortex, the one to the front of that central sulcus, okay? That's going to have the association area in front of it. Now, we're going to see that from this area, we're going to take information, we're going to have the processing of that information to the sensory that has come in. But we are also going to have the access to information for making a planned movement, such as the planning to get up out of the chair to move. All right? So, the motor area, we have to be able to process information that's coming in, such as pain, pressure, touch, and so forth. But we also need to have the ability for doing something planned. An activity that is something ready to go, such as the walking, the picking up the pencil to write, and so forth. The higher order movements. Okay? This is homunculus and the areas of the cortex that get the information. Once again, what do you notice about little man?
He's upside down.
Once again, he's upside down. Still, lots of brain area going to face, the stuff like the lip, and the tongue. Did y'all notice tongue on the little homunculus man? For sensory as well as motor and the hands, okay? If our bodies were made in proportion to the way the brain makes sense of the information, our hands and our feet would be huge, legs would look like toothpicks, the head would be about this big, okay? And, I mean, the tongue would just be, you know, just all stuck out and everything. And that's how we look. But we're in proportion, but these are the areas of the brain that get most of the information, that have most of the space, so to speak. So, these two areas, okay? And then just, if this one is our motor, this was our association area. If this one is sensory, this is the association area for sensory. And then we begin to deal with the special senses, like the special senses here for smell, hearing, some of the taste, sight. Okay? So these are the areas of the brain that we have learned dealing with different information that comes in, that sensory information. Now, one of the things that I've mentioned quite a few times, movements that are planned, movements that you're going to do and know that you're going to get up and you're going to walk. You're going to pick up your books. You're going to write, whatever the case might be. For the control of these skeletal muscles, for this movement, okay, a couple of things have to occur. For the skeletal muscles to be able to maintain upright posture, for example, we're going to find that the deeper muscles of the body do this. Those deeper muscles for just about every movement you can think of, okay? Talking, smiling, whatever the case might be. It's going to be those deeper, smaller muscles. We didn't move into that area of the muscular system when you were in part 1, because there are over 600 muscles of the body, okay? Trying to remember all of that would be overwhelming to everybody, okay? I'm guessing if you're going to move into something such as physical therapy and stuff like that, there are certain ones that are going to become more familiar, okay? But see, here's the reason why. We're dependent on the smaller, deeper muscles. The smaller, deeper muscles, they withstand fatigue. Now, what does that mean?
They don't get as tired.
They don't get tired as easily. Their information, in other words, that action potential, it's pretty much all the time. Think about how you have to walk, sit, stand, okay? You do that for the majority of the day. At night, yeah, you finally lay down, give them some rest, all right? But these muscles have to be able to withstand that. And they do. They work on a reverberating circuit.
Sorry, just the deeper, smaller muscles of the body, they control all the skeletal muscles essentially, or
They're
just
going
those
to
two
control.
sets?
They're going to control the ability for things to maintain. So, in other words, think about the ability to, as you sit there right now. Okay, it's the smaller, deeper muscles keeping you that way, not the bigger muscles that we studied. The bigger muscles that we studied, fatigue. Their job, think of it being chronic versus acute. Something that's chronic is all the time. So the smaller, deeper muscles are the chronic ones. The acute are the bigger ones. The ones that are allowing us to pick up the book, you know, get that walk across the floor, take a run. But eventually they're going to fatigue. So when we begin to activate something that's going to be voluntary, a voluntary movement, you're consciously making that movement. You're consciously getting up out of the chair and moving, walking across the floor, picking up the pencil to write something on the paper. So what we're going to find, there are 2 neurons that help control this. We're going to have an upper and a lower neuron. Now remember, last time that we talked about neurons, where we would have first order, second order, third order, okay? That meant we had like first, second, third, okay? So now, upper motor neurons, we're going to have this processing take place in the brain. This upper neuron is going to, bless you, it's going to go through interneurons, integrating, okay, to the lower, which means that neuron is going to end at the muscle that's needed to carry out the activity. So if it's a voluntary movement to walk, we're going to start here. But that lower neuron ends, think of it ending in your quads, in your hams. Okay? Think of, anybody know how many muscles it takes just to take a step? Over 200 muscles just to make one step. So that's going to be something that you think about doing, okay? And then all of this integrating of that information has to occur. and it has to end at the muscles that are needed to either contract or relax. So we have these areas in the brain, that motor cortex, that are going to help us to do that. Damage those areas, what do you think is going to happen to the abilities?
So when they say two neurons, they're talking about like once walking or contraction of a muscle like becomes muscle memory. I'm guessing like it's when it starts in that gyrus, like that's where they're starting.
That's what think of that preconceived notion. That's where we're going to start it at. Yes.
Okay. But if you're like learning to use a certain muscle, then would they start it prior to that?
Now, that's going to become a part of what we termed the procedural memory. So if we think about walking, for example, none of us in here kind of remember that, right? Okay? Because now it's a procedure. All right? But yes, you trained those muscles. That was a procedure that they learned. And now, all it takes to get those muscles ready is for you to think about it. In other words, and if you think about it, think about this. I know it's kind of hard, it's kind of funny. We don't necessarily think about the walking that we do. We just do it. Okay? But believe it or not, somewhere in the higher order, in the frontal region, okay, is where that started. And then the rest will come down to the procedural, to the muscles it's got to act upon. Does that make sense? So we'll have the initiation of the movement, which is usually somewhere in the frontal area, the frontal region. That is basically the stimulation. All right? That's going to be the start of the action potential. We're going to have it travel down, because it's got to move from here down, stimulate those lower neurons, and basically go to the skeletal muscles that we need the movement from. It doesn't just have to be movement of walking. That is the only example I have given. But I'm purposely moving my arms and my hands. That's another example of me thinking about it and it happening. How is it that the muscles respond to this thought? This goes back to part one. How is it that the muscles of my thoughts for my activities that I'm carrying out how is it that this is happening? You learned this from part one, hopefully. That neuron's connection to the muscle, which already had a little bit of the electricity to it for the action potential. It's going to be that neuron's action on that muscle, which already had some of that electricity, that muscle tone, to start the action potential.
So you were saying the electricity is the muscle tone?
Now, When you learned about the muscle contraction in part 1, you learned that there was an electric potential across that muscle's plasma membrane based on the ion concentration, because the ion concentration is the pluses and the negatives, okay, and they make the electricity. Do you remember from part 1 how when a muscle is at rest, it has this little bit of electricity to it? Do y'all remember that from part 1? That's termed muscle tone. Okay, muscle tone. It's not like thinking of your okay, being tone. All right? If that's the case, I'd never move. All right? It's the muscle itself having that little bit of that electrical charge based on the ions. Now, if that neuron, which I'm firing from up here, okay, that's going to start the action potential on my neurons, right? And if these neurons are ending at the muscle where I need the movement, remember how that connection was? The neuromuscular junction? Does everybody remember that?
I remember the term, but I don't remember.
Okay, so if this, all right, so if this is one muscle, does everybody remember that? Okay, that muscle had one nerve that would supply it. Does everybody remember that? Where you would have that one nerve that came in. Does everybody remember that? And in this muscle, the muscle was made up of muscle fibers. AKA muscle cells. Yes, no, maybe. These muscle fibers, AKA muscle cells, all right, they're made up of the sarcomeres. Yes? The sarcomeres contain the actin and the myosin. And those sarcomeres have to shorten and lengthen. Contraction, relaxation. Right? So, my one nerve that led into this entire muscle, okay? Do you remember how it branched off and met every single muscle cell? So the branching of this nerve would come in and meet somewhere on every muscle cell, muscle fiber. And this area, this is my muscle cell, aka muscle fiber. And if this is the branching from the major nerve, okay, this area right here was my neuromuscular junction. Does everybody remember that? And then I'd have all my sarcomeres. Yes, no, maybe.
So when it makes contact with the fiber, it's The one with the neuron with the fiber is the neuromuscular junction.
This is my major nerve,
Uh-huh.
and then it branches,
And
and when it branches, every single fiber has a branch.
Okay.
That's when it's the neuromuscular junction.
And when it meets that fiber, this is my neuromuscular junction. And because we're talking about muscle contraction, the neurotransmitter, the little product that got created in this nerve, is going to be acetylcholine. Does everybody remember that? And then that started the whole process of that muscle fiber. Note, only one cell. There has to be enough of the cells getting the acetylcholine and responding to it for that entire muscle to react. So, when I begin to think about the actions that I'm doing, okay, these actions that I'm doing, I've thought about it. The nerves that are needed to react are getting the signal from that major nerve down to those nerve ends, those branches, to the fibers to make them contract. And it all started with my thought process. Have you ever thought about your brain this much?
Yeah.
Me either. No, I'm joking. What was it my boyfriend said this weekend?